Hi everyone, welcome and thanks for joining us. For those who don't know me, my name is Simone. I'm community manager with the OED marketing team and I'll be hosting the session today. I'm delighted to be here with Dr. Tania Styles, who will be talking to us about the new ideas around visualizing etymology on the OED. And now, without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to Tania so she can begin.
Thanks very much, Simone. And welcome, everybody. It's brilliant that you could all join us this afternoon. First, I want to thank you so much for setting aside this hour at what I know is a really busy time for everybody. It's very much appreciated. Over the last few months, mostly over lockdown, we've been exploring some possibilities for creating a tool that presents the OED's etymological information in a visual format. And today, I want to share some of these first ideas and sketches with you, fresh from the drawing board, really. So I must stress from the outset, this tool doesn't exist yet, even as a prototype. The purpose of this session really is to introduce the concept and to test the waters with you, to find out whether this is an option that you'd like us to offer. And if so, what kinds of functionality you'd find most useful in your research and teaching. So I'm going to spend the next 25 minutes or so presenting, and then I'm going to leave the rest of the hour for questions and discussion. Your insights will be really invaluable to us as we look towards future developments. So I do hope when the time comes, you won't be shy. So first things first, why would we want to visualize etymologies? Over the past few years, quite a lot of research has been going on at Oxford Languages to find out just how the OED dataset is being used in the academic community and to identify ways in which we might meet needs better. In this consumer outreach, etymologies are consistently singled out as an aspect of the dictionary that users value particularly highly, which is great. Another message that comes through loud and clear is that a lot of researchers are quite keen to make more of the etymological information that the OED offers. In fact, in a survey that we did recently, when users of the OED were asked what they would do with unrestricted access to the whole of the dictionary's dataset, the fourth most popular answer was that they would like to explore etymology more deeply. And it is true that while our etymology data is extremely rich and detailed, and we're really proud of it, using it to its full potential isn't always straightforward. There's another factor. There also seems to be a large general demand for etymology visuals and for infographics recently, and for applications and websites that generate them. Quite a lot of products like this have been launched in relatively recent months, and here are just a few. So these are some of the factors that really motivated us to look into the potential of using the OED dataset to create etymology visuals. Our etymologies, especially the ones we've revised, tend to use quite standardized structures and formulae, and they're also marked up with tagging that's normally invisible to the reader of OED.com, but could easily be put to more use than it is now. So it seemed to us that a visualization tool based on OED etymology data could make an important contribution to what we know to be a growth area. The first question to ask, of course, is what exactly do we want this tool to do? And several different use cases presented themselves to us. I'd like to show you 4 of these today. So the first, and probably most obvious use for a visual, is really clarification. So the old adage that a picture speaks 1,000 words. On the right of your screen there is our etymology for the noun spirit. It might not be very clear, but don't worry, I won't be going into it in a huge amount of detail. So this was an entry that was published in the OED.com update this June. And to be honest, I've chosen it really mostly with Halloween in mind, but not because it's particularly special or unusual in any way. As OED etymologies go, it's not unusually long or complicated, but it's still quite a dense chunk of solid text to digest, even, I think, probably for the expert reader. Of all parts of an OED entry, etymologies are probably the least accessible to the non-specialist, or as somebody put it to me the other day, the etymology is the scariest bit. So there is quite a lot of technical detail there, and all of it interesting, relevant, and important. But the sheer volume of information can make it difficult to pick out the main narrative. We do now supply a brief origin statement here for people who just really want to know what sort of formation is this. So here you might be able to see if your screen is clear enough. This is a word of multiple origins, borrowed partly from French and partly from Latin. But inevitably, there will be times when a reader needs to know more than that, but finds it quite hard to see the wood for the trees in the full etymology text. So here's how we think a visualization tool might go some way to meeting that particular need. It could use the etymology data to generate a simple flowchart of just the main transmission of a word in an entry, giving a level of detail that sort of bridges the gap really between the minimal origin statement and the fuller etymological discussion below. The diagram, we thought, could then be used alongside the full text as a sort of explanatory visual aid to make its content more accessible and easier to use and navigate. So perhaps it could provide a handy sort of outline or research or summary for the researcher in a hurry, or maybe serve as a sort of friendly guide map to the full discussion for a student who might otherwise find it a bit intimidating or confusing. So to focus in on some of the features of this transmission map. So you can see here it's presented in a timeline format, moving forward in time as you read from left to right. So this effectively works in the opposite direction from the written etymology, which starts with your English word and then moves backwards in time, step by step, through ulterior etymons. But this seemed to us quite an intuitive way of presenting the information and possibly a useful alternative to perspective to the one given in the etymology text proper. And it should be easy enough for a visualization tool to allow users to set their own preferences when it comes to the sort of direction of flow. Lexical items on the transmission pathway are then presented with brief glosses in boxes here. So you can see the Latin words on this diagram are given in turquoise boxes and the French in lilac. And then the English word itself in a larger box here, styled to match the presentation of OED entries. Etymological relationships between these lexical items are then represented by arrows, which I've introduced briefly in the key here. After quite a lot of discussion, this is one simple scheme that we came up with. So as a top level distinction, it seemed most useful to distinguish between borrowing on the one hand and internal formations on the other. So blue arrows here indicate borrowing between languages and grey ones indicate either development happening within a single language or lineal descent from a parent language. So this does leave the grey arrow to do quite a lot of work, covering several etymological mechanisms really, including, for instance, things like conversion from one part of speech to another, clipping or shortening, back formation, alteration. But in cases where it seems helpful to specify which process is involved, we've considered the option of doing so in small text below the relevant arrow here, as I've done for the arrow on the key. Then cases where two or more lexical items are combined, as here and here on the spirit map, are shown by the converging curly bracket arrow symbol here. Again, this covers several distinct processes really, as we would identify in our etymology origin statements. So any situation where the OED etymology text would use the plus symbol, such as compounding and derivation by adding a suffix or prefix, as well as things like blending. Connections that are uncertain, for instance, where the etymology text says perhaps or probably or apparently, are then indicated by fading the relevant arrow with the level of uncertainty specified in italics above. Now, this is quite a lot of explanation for what I hope is actually a relatively self-explanatory diagram. I hope it tells the story of the main transmission of the noun spirit in quite a clear and intuitive way. That is, within classical Latin, the verb meaning to breathe is combined with a noun-forming suffix to give a noun spiritus. That then develops by lineal descent into French esprit, and the French noun and the Latin noun that's its etymon are then both borrowed into English in the 14th century. Of course, the transmission map here is very much a simplification of the account given in the written etymology. That's sort of the point, really. There's naturally a balance to be struck, though, between detail on the one hand and clarity on the other. And there's obviously a limit to how much information it's possible to encode in an image before it starts to become cluttered and confusing. As the point of the visual here was really to sit alongside the OED etymology and make it easier to process, we've opted to keep the display quite clean and sparse to maximise clarity. I should also add that this particular display scheme is by no means one that we're firmly wedded to. Rather than colour, for instance, we could equally use different styles of our arrow to symbolise different relationships. Were we to develop a tool further, we would look to do so obviously in consultation with designers who have the expertise to maximise accessibility. For example, for people with colour vision deficiency, or to enable printing in black and white. But that said, I hope that this shows the sort of concept that we have in mind, and perhaps the potential that a visual could have to convey a relatively large amount of etymological information quite clearly and efficiently. So now to our second use case for a future visualization tool. The etymology section of the entry for spirit we've just seen probably contains pretty much all the information that most readers would want to know about the route by which that word came into English. But the same can't be said for every word by any means. So often the transmission pathway of a word will be split across several OED entries. And in that case, tracing the etymology of a word right back as far as it goes in the OED involves piecing the relevant information together using cross-reference links to hop from entry to entry and making notes as you go. This can be quite time-consuming and laborious. For instance, imagine that you want to know the ulterior etymon of the word melon. So you look that entry up in the OED. And the etymology at melon noun 1 tells you that it's a 14th century borrowing from French, that this immediate French etymon is descended from a post-classical noun, mello, which in turn is probably shortened from an older Latin name for the fruit, mello peppo. But if you want to find out where that came from, then you need to leave this entry by following the cross-reference to the entry mello pepon to pick up the trail there. Again, though, that only gets you so far. It tells you that the classical Latin fruit name is a borrowing of a Greek compound and identifies the elements that make it up. But for their etymology, you need to up sticks again and hop across to the OED entries for male noun 2 and pepon noun. And then the ulterior etymon of Greek pepon is covered at yet another entry, the noun cook. So in fact, if you want to trace the entire transmission pathway of the word melon back as far as it goes in the OED, you need to consult not one entry, but 5. A tool designed to generate transmission maps of the kind that we saw at Spirit should be able to do a lot of this legwork for you by automating the process of entry hopping to join all the relevant information together and then presenting the word's entire transmission pathway in a single visual. If a user were keen to know more detail, then this would still be available in the full etymology text of the individual entries, which I've linked in the box here. But a visual could be a useful way to save time and effort in this sort of situation, synthesizing actually quite a large amount of information and presenting, I think, a useful overview. So far, I've talked about some ways to visualize the etymology of a single English word. Building on these ideas, we have also experimented with some ways in which a tool that maps transmission pathways might actually be used more adventurously to reveal etymological connections between different words in the OED and allow you to explore them. So imagine, for example, you just use the tool like we did just now to map the transmission pathway of melon. You might be interested to know more about one of the words in the timeline here and wonder which other English words might ultimately be derived from it. So say if this Hellenistic Greek word for an edible gourd caught your eye, the visualization tool could then give you a list of OED headwords whose main transmission also includes this word and let you select which transmission pathway to expand forwards. This would show you then how this Greek word is also at several removes. Also at several removes gives rise to two more English nouns denoting edible gourds, and that's pompion here, and then by alteration of that, the noun pumpkin. Or you might wonder whether classical Latin pepon here ever gave rise to a word in English, and then expanding the pathway forwards from that node tells you that you're right, it was borrowed into Old English to give this word for a melon or pumpkin. And similarly, extending transmission pathways forwards from Latin melopepo brings you to a related word that you might not have known about at all, the obsolete 16th century loan word melopepon, which was used up until the mid-18th century for various types of squash. Or finally, by selecting the Greek word for apple, you could opt to see how that word is related to the name of another English fruit, and that's the peach. So as I hope you can see, this kind of functionality would allow you to create your own bespoke tree or route map of etymologically related words. And this one shows you that melon is not only related to pumpkin, but also to peach. If each of the boxes for OED headwords here worked then as a clickable link to that entry, you could then use the network that you built yourself as a kind of interactive map to access and explore the dictionary. So navigating between OED entries for all of these related words to discover how they've been used in English over time. So in the same kind of way that you can now explore the dictionary according to semantic principles, using the underpinning tree structure of the historical thesaurus, a network like the ones I've been showing could allow you to explore the dictionary according to etymological principles. This seemed quite an interesting concept to us, and I look forward to hearing what you think about it. Now, this brings me to the last use case that I want to show you today. One question that you might reasonably want the OED to answer is, are these two English words that I'm interested in etymologically related to each other? A visualization tool that works on the principles I've shown here should enable you to answer this kind of question by mapping the main transmission pathway of each of your two words back to their ultimate etymon in the OED to see whether the two pathways meet at any point along their course. And this would then show you whether the words share a common ancestor. So say, for instance, you wondered whether the noun cookie was related to the verb to cook. The visualization tool could then create you a full transmission map for the two words, first cookie and then cook. As you can see here, the two transmission pathways do not join at any point along their course, they remain parallel. This means that they don't share a common ancestor, and so we have an answer to our question, no, cookie and the verb cook aren't directly etymologically related to each other. On the other hand, having seen this little diagram, you might want to ask, is cookie related to cake? So in this case, mapping the two words together shows that their transmission pathways do in fact converge to shared ancestor. So they both go back to the same Germanic base in pink here. So in this case, our answer is yes, cookie is etymologically related to cake. Using visualization functionality to interrogate the dictionary like this actually becomes quite addictive and can reveal some quite unexpected connections. And for this one, you have to bear with me as I scroll my visual smoothly down. For instance, you can find out that cook might not be related to cookie, but it is related to biscuit. And then all the healthy fruit and vegetable words that we looked at earlier are related to biscuit too. So melon, pumpkin, and peach, and friends all ultimately go back to the same Indo-European base here, meaning to cook. Incidentally, I'm not sure whether that means that a chocolate biscuit counts as one of your 5 a day, but I would like to think it did. And again, as well as revealing etymological connections, a map built this way could provide a way for you to access the OED, navigating between the entries marked on your tree by using their boxes as clickable links to open and explore all that they have to offer. So, to sum up, everything I've presented here is a mock-up built by hand, by human, in fact by me, from OED etymology data. And I've just mocked up really one possibility for using visualization to explore the dictionary and hence the language. I hope I've given an idea of the kind of functionality that a future tool might be able to provide and some of the research questions it might help to answer. I'm sure you'll have views on all these experimental sketches and I'd very much like to hear them. From my point of view, in particular, it would be useful to know if functionality to explore the OED visually using etymology data was made available, how would you use this in your academic work and/or teaching? And how could this kind of functionality better suit your particular purposes? Your insights will inform our decisions about future development, so I do hope you'll be willing to share them. Naturally, I'm also very happy to answer any questions that you may have or to go back and revisit any slide that you'd like to look at more closely. So thank you very much for your attention and it's really over to you.
Thank you very much, Tania. This was really very interesting. So as I mentioned, we are going to open it for discussions now. I'm going to start with a question that was sent in through the comment box. In cases like that of melon, it's a matter of luck whether the OED happens to contain another entry, allowing us to trace the etymology of a particular word further back. Are you filling this information in from etymological dictionaries of other languages, for example, ancient Greek, or will the visualization tool be strictly limited to the information which has a reason to be in the OED? If the latter, that seems fair enough, but it could be misleading if people think that lack of some information means the information doesn't exist.
That's a really good question. At the moment, the intention is to visualize the information that is in the OED. So yes, you're right. It's quite possible that the trail could sort of go cold at some point along your transmission pathway. At the moment, we haven't really considered the possibility of filling in that extra information from elsewhere, but it's certainly something that we could think about and that we'd want to trial how a lot of these options worked in a pilot to see to try and make sure that we are giving results that are meaningful. I mean, it may be possible to give to indicate that this particular trail has ended because there's no further information in the OED, rather than because the OED has actually completed the transmission pathway to its ultimate end. But that's a great thing for us to think about as we look to develop further. So yes, thank you very much.
Thanks, Tania. We've got Aneta Naumoska with their hand raised.
So good afternoon to everybody, or good morning, good evening. I'm I teach history of the English language. I teach it to English majors at the University of Skopje in Macedonia. I have actually no question for you. I'd just like to thank you as the presenter, and just I'd like to thank OED for this session because it was really helpful. I think that I will use this kind of functionality in my classes because I teach history as a one semester course, and the first thing that students make me aware of is that they want a lot of visualization, especially when we get to cognates. So I think this will be very useful for cognates, and just to make a kind of a mind map of how things go along the way in terms of history. So thank you once again, and I will be waiting for more information on this, but it's going to be very useful for my purposes teaching. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tania. So that's really great. Yeah, I can really imagine this being useful for students as well. So I'm glad that you share that feeling, particularly in the, as you say, in the case of cognates, where you do have a lot of cognates listed in an etymology that are strictly not even in the main transmission pathway of the word. So indicating that this is information that branches off in a way from the main transmission pathway is I think a case where this kind of thing could be really quite useful. But yeah, no, I'm really glad that you think you'd use it. And if you do have any suggestions about particular features that you'd find especially useful, then it would be great to know. Well, and from anyone else as well, obviously. So thank you.
Thank you, Aneta. We've got John Considine with their hands up as well.
Hi, Tania. It's very good to see you again, even at this strange distance.
Hello, John.
The first thing I want to say is that the first thing I should say is that I'm John Considine. I teach English at the University of Alberta in Canada. The first thing that I want to say to you is that I'm very interested and impressed by what you've shown us. It seems to me that my students at the University of Alberta, most of whom are native speakers of English with an intelligent interest in the language, have always found OED etymologies difficult, and the more elaborate the etymology, the harder it is for them. I think that the visualization that you're imagining would be a very good gateway for students to get into an entry. I think I see it more as a teaching tool than as a tool that I'd be using in my own research. But teaching is important. My question is to what extent you think the availability of the visualization tool might actually affect the way in which entries are written. And I think this speaks to the last question. Wouldn't it, for instance, be tempting, once you've got this tool, to spend a bit more time on starred Indo-European forms in order to make links, or to point out possible links between groups of entries? Is this a tool that would drive entry writing style in any way, do you think?
That's a really good question. As far as I know, there are no plans afoot to change the style in which we write our etymologies, or in particular how we represent sort of starred into, or don't represent starred Indo-European forms. But it might, as you say, it might be a good reason to have a closer look at making links between words at the Indo-European level a little bit more clear. As I say, I don't think there are any aren't any plans to change the way that we write etymologies, because we have written so many of them are now revised that it's not something I think we would necessarily certainly go back and rethink from scratch. But I think creating links like this and looking at networks does make you just look at the question of bases and things slightly differently. So yes, I think we'd have to see really if we do get the chance to develop this tool further, what implications that it might have in the way that we look at etymologies. That's not a very clear question, but my answer really is that I don't think we're not going to change there are no plans afoot to change the way in which we represent things at that end in the written text, but it might be possible to allow the visualization tool to make links at the Indo-European end clearer for users.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Tania, we've got a nice comment. It's not a question, but I'll just read it to you. This tool will allow students to do their own research and make it much more interesting and appealing to do so. So thanks for the comment.
Oh, that's lovely.
We've got a comment from Tania Styles. So nice to see you there, Tania.
So hi, this is Tania Styles from the University of Helsinki. And,
hi Tania, great.
This was really exciting. Thank you. I've got lots of different things in mind, but maybe I'll first ask this one that I put in the chat. So how would you present etymological information like see or compare? So I was looking at the etymology of the word declivity, and there it says it comes from Latin, blah, blah, blah. And then it says see, declive, noun, and it suffix. And then it says compare, French, déclivité. So in my work, I'm interested in both of these.
Well, at the moment, the plan is this is a tool that maps main transmission pathways. So words that are actually part of the main transmission of a word into English would appear on our visualization tool, but things that are compared because they are related or interesting semantically or parallel information. So things that are mentioned as interesting additional information at the moment aren't dealt with by a tool like this. But my hope would be that something that did actually single out the main transmission and that particular sort of flow of etymological development would then make the purpose of the information that you were comparing a little bit clearer. So it would be obvious that say your I can't remember the word that was compared now, but it might be more obvious that this was being mentioned because it was parallel and not because it was intimately involved in the transmission of the word into English. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thanks. I was also thinking that would it be possible to make these figures somehow interactive? So you're only showing some detail here, but would it be possible to kind of zoom in if you're interested in more? So you could, I don't know, hover your mouse over a section or click on it to sort of expand or
to actually show more actual information, or just to enlarge displays.
Show more information, definitely. Yeah, like possibly, more and more of the etymology.
At the moment, it's not quite clear how we would do that, given the tagging that we have in our etymologies, and we have tagging that pretty robustly identifies the immediate etymon of a word, and we have tagging on all the foreign language forms which identifies the language that they're from, so they're all securely identified. But yeah, I'm not it might be possible to anyway expand and display text. Yeah, that's an interesting possibility. We'll have to think about that, if it would be useful to you to zoom in.
Yeah. And also maybe compressing, because these seem to take quite a lot of space if you're if the chain is very long. So maybe you could think of kind of having a more text-based interface as well as for the semantics.
Yes, that's a good idea. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, I'll shut up now. I've got more. But
thank you very much for your
contribution.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks, Tania. Nice talking to you again. And I've got the next question we've got from the comments is, I'm wondering about morphology slash spelling versus semantic development. Sometimes they diverge. Would there be a way to present that visually?
Probably. It would be, can you think of an example?
So this question was from Jack Bailey. I'm going to unmute you if you don't mind.
Hi, I'm Jacques. I'm from University of Vermont. I teach etymology in Latin and Greek, among other things. So what's an example? Oh, I'm having a hard time thinking of one now, of course.
Are you thinking of cases where, for instance, a particular English word becomes sort of established in a particular variant spelling in a particular sense, so that there's a range of spellings, but then one particular branch of that spelling comes to effectively function as a separate word?
Yes, or yeah. Say the Latin prefix ad. It's usually a prefix, but then over in anatomy, it seems to almost be a suffix sometimes. But the main thing about it is that prefix ad, when it's in anatomy, doesn't assimilate. So like adrenal doesn't become arenal, like, you know, arrogate becomes adrogate becomes arrogate. So you get that there's sort of a semantic thing that goes along with spelling in a way there, but it would be a complex sort of tree.
Yeah, I mean, it would be great if we could do something like that, and it's something to think about. I think it's probably something that slightly different from what I've been showing today, but if it's the sort of thing that people would find useful, then that's perhaps something we could talk about and think about. So, thank you.
Yeah,
I mean,
Tania, could I jump in? Because I think we can answer to the question. So, hi, I'm Emily Hoyland. I'm the product manager here at Oxford Languages, and we are currently working on a very similar sort of process that Tania's described what she's been doing here for semantic visualization of the OED. And so I think within there will be further webinars and focus groups surrounding that particular feature, because we think that feature would also add a huge amount of value to the questions that you're answering. So when that goes around, I think that will be a really interesting session for you to attend as well, Jacques.
Okay, can I add one more thing? I
Mm-hmm.
love the idea of labeling the arrows, because it seems like those arrows are doing so much in so many different ways that labeling them as they go along would be wonderful. I agree that you want sparse clarity, maybe a bi-level thing where you can toggle to the more complex color-coded full-on version that's going to confuse you from the very simple sparse line.
That's a brilliant idea. I love the idea of being able to toggle on and off different levels of detail. And one thing we have considered is creating sort of call outs or things, if you say hovered over, if there's a language name or something like that within the transmission pathway, and you're thinking, oh, hang on, Anglo-Norman, when was that and what's going on there, that you could almost hover and then have a call out that explained to you, well, this is what we mean by this term, this is how we use it. Because I think there's all sorts of, I mean, in an ideal world, it would be great to have all kinds of level of detail. But again, you know, it would be a case of sort of weighing up the utility to the user and the time that would be involved to make something like that. But yeah, I love the idea of toggling on and off different levels of detail. Thank you.
Yeah, we're asking for the world, but that's what the OED has delivered. So thank you.
The world. Okay, no problem.
Well, the world.
All a day's work.
Thank you. We've got Suzanne Kemmer with a hand up. So Suzanne, you are now unmuted.
Suzanne Kemmer from the Department of Linguistics at Rice University in Houston, Texas. And I just wanted to say a general comment, sort of in addition to the comment that I put in the chat, which is this visualization allows the use of more than one dimension in some very nice ways. So in the text etymologies, we have basically a one-dimensional line of information, and there's so much in it, all in the same format, and there's so many different dimensions of information, conceptual dimensions of information, that it really can obscure getting the information out. And I guess that's the motivation for this visualization to start with. But with these tables, or rather kind of flow charts, you're using 2 dimensions of space, adding color, adding labels, adding symbols like arrows of different types, is all really, really great stuff. But I was also wondering about, one of the other commenters mentioned zooming in to get more information. I think that's a really great idea. The idea of zooming in on Anglo-Norman or something to get more information, that would be one thing. But I was also thinking about the kind of information that is irrelevant for particular kinds of researchers, if it's possible for them to kind of get that in the background, but if they need it, to then bring it to the foreground. So one of the traditional problems with the etymologies as they're written, for somebody who studies semantics like myself, is all those different variant forms, all of the different forms, because an etymology has to trace form and meaning. And the forms, for my purposes, get in the way. I just want one form and be able to trace it reasonably through time, but I don't really care about the form as much as I do about the meaning. And so getting those out of there, out of my line of sight, really helps a lot. And that's not to say they should be erased, because they've got to be in there, but to have a bubble that I could call up the variant forms if I want to. And maybe in the visualization that you presented, it already looked like there was a simplification down to one form on each stage of the timeline, that you've already done something with that information. But then it makes me wonder what's happened to that information, and can you recover it if you're one of the, say, traditional philologists who is interested in the variant forms and wants to look at the change of forms, or you're a phonologist, a historical phonologist, and you want to kind of map through the different sound changes.
Yes, that's a really good idea. I mean, well, the first thing I would say is, obviously, the kind of things I've been showing aren't intended in any way as a sort of alternative to the full detail that you get in an OED entry. Linking, sort of calling up a variance forms list, you're thinking of like kind of calling up a list of variant forms by hovering over one particular box. So looking at a list of variant spellings for a French word, say.
Or not necessarily hovering over it, but clicking on it if you're interested.
Clicking on it to say show forms.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's an interesting possibility. Yeah, that's a good idea. Thank you. Yes, we'll have to think about that.
And I have one more question that I hope could be addressed, and that is about accessibility. Visualizations, of course, make everything more wonderful and accessible to people who have sight. But I have a blind colleague, and I know various other people who are blind or visually impaired in some ways. And I was wondering if any thought had been given to how to fit this kind of visualization into existing types of accessibility for visually impaired people, so that they could still get benefit out of the improvements that you're making, but would not be completely shut out of this visualization.
Well, the answer to that is, it is something that we are aware of, and it's something that we are thinking about. But at this stage, I mean, we're at such an early stage of thinking about this project, really, that we haven't come to any solutions. I mean, if we go on to develop further, as I'd hope we would, then we'd obviously have to take some expert advice on the best way to maximize accessibility for people who have any kind of sight issue. Yeah, yeah. So it's definitely on our radar. At the moment, it's not something that we've solved by any means, but it's definitely something that yes, that we're aware of, and we know it's an issue that we'd like to tackle.
Okay, thank you. That answers my questions.
Thank you.
Thank you. Then I've got another question from Jacques in the comments. I hope people don't mind that I am saying who's sending the questions through the comments. Normally I wouldn't, but I've already put people on the spot here, so I hope that's fine. So another question is about folk etymology, which is a strong force in language, although sometimes poo-pooed by linguists. Students in particular love these, and I like to bring them in when I teach etymology. Would there be a visual way to indicate them? Perhaps a nice color for the arrow and a label?
It would certainly be possible to label any developments that are happening by folk etymology. Yes, that's an interesting idea, actually, because I know people love folk etymologies, and it's an interesting sort of phenomenon in language change. So thank you. Yes, that's something to think about, definitely.
And yet another question from Jacques. So about chronology. On the cookie cake melon tree, is the chronology reflected in the left to right display? That is, can I draw a vertical line to find with what is coeval versus what is later or earlier?
On this diagram, I'm afraid no, you can't. And the reason for that is there would be such clustering in some parts of the diagram and such huge long arrows. I do know what you mean, the idea of sort of aligning things that are happening in the same kind of time period as you read across the chart. It's a really interesting idea. The issue here, just with what I've created here, is just visibility and how much you can fit on a screen. It would be interesting if there was a way somehow to indicate which parts of a timeline, of two timelines, are happening at the same time. Perhaps there would be alternative displays that we could think about that could indicate that. But that's a really good question. The reason why this doesn't happen at the moment, as I say, is just sheerly because there's an awful lot of information to fit on a screen.
Thank you. And there is yet another comment. The American Heritage Dictionary of Indo-European Roots by the late Albert Watkins and others is an interesting work collecting English words with an Indo-European etymology and the Proto-Indo-European roots they've derived from. It might be worth seeing if some crossover is possible if the publisher is willing.
Oh, that's a really interesting possibility. Thank you.
This came from Philemon Probert.
Thank you, Philemon. That's a really good idea. We'll have to think about sort of how it's possible to, yes, sort of sync with other tools that are out there, and that's an interesting one. Yeah, definitely. Thank you.
Thank you. And now a question from Mark Alexander. I likewise don't have a question, but a comment of support. Oh, sorry, so it's a comment, not a question. I've spent hours this morning doing these manually for students in my lexicology class, and the idea that I can not only get them easily, but more importantly, get my students to make maps themselves as an activity is very exciting. Oh, thank you, Mark.
Thank you. Excellent. Thank you very much for passing that on.
And now there is another comment from Jacques. So the visualization seems to be built for a look back. It would be great if we could also get a look forward. What I mean is that I might choose Latin status and see a tree that leads to state, status, state, eta, and maybe others I don't know about. I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing any of these words. I use the Etymology Advanced Search function to try to do this occasionally, but the visualization too seems well conceived for this sort of thing.
I do think a network like this, I mean, once conceptually the elements within the transmission pathways are linkable, then tracing things forwards or backwards is equally easy. So that kind of thing is exactly should be possible, that you you input a word that isn't an entry, that isn't an OED entry, and then find out all of the words in English that develop from that word. That would certainly be possible if we can encode, if we can get the improvements that we'd need to our data, really, to allow reliable linking forward to create this kind of thing. So yes, it's the network, creating the network that's the thing that we need to do, and then there are all kinds of things we could do with it.
Another comment here, and this is coming from Louise Sylvester. This all looks wonderful. My question was also about other tools. It would be great to be able to click on, for example, the Anglo-Norman box and see other senses that the word might have been borrowed later and formed another meaning or word in English.
That would be great, wouldn't it? If you could select your box and then well, all of the information about different forms and senses that have been borrowed into English is in the full etymology text and is tagged. So if you could link from this box to get all that information, yeah, that would be really good.
Philemon, you had your hand up.
I did. I just wanted to add to the comment that you read out of mine in the chat box. I actually intended that as a follow-up to John Considine's question about doing more at the Indo-European end. It was just a thought. It stayed in the chat box for a while, but it was meant as a thought, as a follow-up to that.
Thank you. That makes perfect sense. Thanks, Philemon.
Thank you.
My apologies. I didn't realize that. Thanks for clarifying. And we've got another comment from Jacques. So if the temporal information is tagged, perhaps the timeline information could be coded in and a temporal toggle added in.
Mm-hmm. Yes, we'll have to think about how to. It would be interesting to be able to indicate the time spans involved, and I think it's something that we probably ought to do some thinking about. That sounds like a good contribution. Thank you.
Could I ask? So sorry, this is Emily again. Yeah, Tania and I would have to riddle that out, and it sounds like a really interesting thing that it would be, you know, within a tool and being able to zoom in on areas. That would be the ideal place to see it. Would you be able to suggest what use you would make of that display, how it would improve, just to understand kind of in sort of thinking about what the solution would be, what kind of value that utilization would give you?
Is that a question for me, Emily?
No, for Jacques. And anyone else who thinks that the timeline's a good idea.
So I like to present occasionally in my etymology class something like just yesterday I presented, you know, Arabic words in English, and it goes. I mean, I think the earliest one I found was saffron from the 11th century, and of course moving forward, and it's nice to think of the growth and evolution of particular words, but also the vocabulary in general over time, and to see when things are happening. And so that's essentially, I like to show students and to figure out for myself those sorts of things. And frankly, being able to visualize it is just so very important, because it's instant understanding, where explaining it in words takes so much time and doesn't work as well.
Thank you. That explanation was so helpful.
Now I can see it would be really good to be able to see what developments were happening at a particular point in time. So if there is suddenly a great productivity in information from a particular word at a particular point in time, that would be a really interesting thing to be able to see. So we'd have to do some thinking really about how we'd do that. But it's definitely something that we'll think about. So thank you very much, Jack.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And there is another question from Philemon. In another OED visualization tool, if I remember rightly, there is a timeline with a logarithmic scale. Perhaps this could help with Jack's suggestion for a timeline here as well.
So yeah, is this the this is the currency information, is it? Or
I think it's the one called OED visualization tool. I think.
Yeah, the text
the
visualizer.
text visualizer. Yes, the text visualizer.
The text
I've got you.
yes.
Yes, that's another tool that that deals with developments happening at particular points in time. Yes, that might be something you might like to have a play with as well, Jack.
Yes, I suppose I'm not sure if it would help for this, but if I'm remembering that rightly, they have this type of scale where the amount of space between one date and another becomes bigger the closer you are to the present. I'm not sure if the problem with etymologies is quite the same, whether we have a lot of information on very recent history and then it becomes sparser, or whether it's actually a different type of problem where we've got quite a lot of information on, if a word has an ancient Greek origin, then we've got a massive information at that particular period of time and sparser in the midst. So it may be a different problem. I'm just not sure.
No, it's worth looking at, definitely. Thank you.
Thank you. And I've got a question from Ujjaljit. Apologies if I'm mispronouncing it. And Ujjal is from the Guru Nanak Dev University, Amritsar in India. So here goes. First of all, I must say that the session is really very interesting. So thank you. But one thing which I have observed is that these flowcharts are having boxes only. Would it be good if we could use more shapes in order to distinguish, let's say, word categories or the information categories as well?
That's an interesting idea. That's a very good idea, and I can imagine, yes, different shaped boxes are going to be perhaps clearer and more useful in conveying information if anybody wants to print. So yes, that's a very good point.
Thank you. From Jacques. So Covered Watkins needs an update by now. It doesn't have a lot of essential things, particularly laryngeals. Am I saying that correctly? But it is great, so if that's what's available, please do use it. Brill authors might have bandwidth for this from their fantastic and fantastically expensive PA toolkit.
Okay, thanks for the tip off.
So John Considine has his hand up.
I think that's a question that emerges from thinking about integrating Calvus Watkins's very, very helpful handbook to Indo-European etyma in English, and indeed a question that emerges from thinking about whether Calvus Watkins says as much about the laryngeals as we all want to hear. How much of the work on this visualizer would be done by OED etymology editors and would therefore take them away from revising 19th century etymologies in OED, and how much of it would be fairly mechanical work which could be done by less expert hands?
Again, that's a really good question. So in order to do this kind of thing, the first thing to say probably is that we probably already have the most important thing that we need, because we have the data set. And the data set already has some of the markup that we'd need to make some of these things possible. For instance, it can fairly robustly identify immediate etymons. In order to make this sort of flowchart idea work, it would be necessary to, I think, add some more tagging to identify words on a transmission pathway to disambiguate those from words that are being mentioned because they're parallels or cognates, or we're just comparing for some other reason. So that would be the most time-consuming part. It would involve, I think, work from on the technical side, so from the language engineers, but also some input from the etymology team. going by what we've done with tagging in the past, I mean, it is possible to do automate a certain amount of that using parsers and things that can identify chunks of text within from signs and things like that. But whatever was done along those lines automatically would need to be checked by a human with expertise to make sure that and refined to make sure that sensible results were coming out. Really, how long that's it's quite hard for me to say how long that would take, or yes, in terms of I don't know what kind of figure I'd ever be able to put on that kind of thing, but I can say that if the input needed from etymology editors was such that it significantly impacted on our editorial progress, doing other things that we're committed to doing, like finishing, revising the dictionary wholesale, then that wouldn't be something I don't think that we'd want to do. Some calculations would need to be done to weigh up the benefits something like this would give to users against the sort of cost in resource, and bearing in mind all the other things that we're still very keen to do. But a lot of testing would have to be done. I think we'd probably want to look at a small sort of subset of vocabulary and study what's required there really before we could make any calculations. I mean, the first step towards any of this is what's happening today, is sort of gauging if there's an appetite for this kind of thing and trying to get some idea of exactly what people would like to see. And then we have to go away and do some thinking and calculations, really.
Yes, that makes sense. Thank you very much.
Thank you, John.
Thank you. Philemon, you've got your hand up again. You should be able to unmute yourself.
If I may, thank you. I just wanted to also just voice support for all the work that you're doing on updating etymologies themselves, because I think when we're asked, you know, would we like this, it's always a bit like being asked if you'd like a cafe in your library. It's one thing to think it would be great to have a cafe, it's another thing to have a cafe instead of a load of books. And so I think this looks great, but I just also want to support, because the entries that you've updated recently, they're fantastic. They're really, really great and super useful. And I'd be very sad to see that work kind of, yes, taking a back seat because of other things.
I can assure you there's no plan for that to happen, Philemon. We are as keen as you are to carry on revising etymologies in the OED.
Great.
I just wanted to say a big thank you to you, Tania, for presenting this. This was really very interesting. And a big thank you all to everyone who attended and for all the fantastic comments and questions. But it looks like there isn't. So I just wanted to, again, thank everyone. I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope all the insights are going to be useful for you, Tania. And just thanks again, wishing everyone a good day or evening or morning, wherever you are. So from us for now, it's a goodbye.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.